So I'm James Palmer, Business Development Manager at North Building Technologies. We've been established here in Brighton since 1995, controls manufacturer, with a background in integration. Essentially, integration is a thing that we really specialise in. Integration has gone really from a sort of bleeding edge technology. You know, when we first started out, we were seen as real mavericks, really, doing something quite different. The idea that a machine would talk to a machine any way other than 0 to 10 volts or a volt-free contact was, seen as quite unusual. RS232 really, that standard ushered in that ability, and it was widely adopted. Of course, what people didn't recognise was that wasn't the whole protocol stack. It was half of the protocol stack, and there was this translation that it needed on top of that, and that was the bit that we really specialised in, and that's where all of our technology has come from, really, from being experts in integration and understanding all of these different protocols. The change that's happened, the change I expected to happen was that we would have consolidated down to one real standard for buildings, and there isn't one, frankly. BACnet's really good. That has had a consolidating effect. There are fewer protocols out there now, for sure. But BACnet doesn't get much further than the plant room, you know, and fan coil units perhaps on MSTP. Outside of the sort of our little HVAC world, there are far more protocols. There's probably more Modbus devices in the world than there are BACnet devices, I'd a guess. LON sort of came and went. It's still around a bit. KNX in lighting, DALI in lighting, and then all the proprietary protocols in lighting, because although ballasts tend to be DALI based, the lighting control modules certainly aren't, you know, so they all talk their own proprietary protocols. So yeah, there's been a consolidation, but actually there's still lots and lots of integration needed on every project, and things like the ubiquitous Japanese air conditioning units now that are everywhere, they have slowly started to take on board the need for standard protocols, but that's a big part of our business, is selling interfaces to Mitsubishi, Daikin, Sanyo, Panasonic as they are now, you know, Fujitsu units, and getting those into VMS systems or into our control systems. So the change has been that really not in the way that we talk to machine, but the fact that machine-to-machine communications is now standard on every job. It's expected, and a lot of people tried to they tried not to do it actually for a long time, because they were used to selling on a cost per point model. You know, you could go into a building and see that there was 1,000 points of control needed, and you could very quickly work out how much that was going to cost. Now there might be 50, 100 points of actual control with relays and sensors, and the rest are software points. The per point model doesn't really work then. So people did try to avoid it, but now they can't. It's there, and it's changing again with the Internet of Things. It's gonna become, you know, the whole new thing to learn, and a whole new thing for people to resist. Of building controls, I think the controller will disappear from the building. That's what I really think will happen. I think it's inevitable, and the strategy for non-life critical stuff, I think life critical stuff will stay where it is, maybe with some redundancy in the cloud. But I think the actual strategy for controlling an air handling unit, pumps and valves and boilers and all the rest of it, will exist in the cloud, and that's going to be forced on us from the IT world, and forced on us from, well, I can walk down the road here to Maplin's now and buy sensors and actuators and things and put them all around my house, thermostatic radiator valves, that are all wireless, that all come back to a thing, and then I can write some, you know, some Node-RED strategy in the cloud that controls all of that, you know. And okay, that's back to what I said earlier about where integration was when I started in the industry 25 years ago. It was bleeding edge, and it's a bit bleeding edge now, and it's a bit hobbyist now, that approach. It's really for, you know, someone who's a bit nerdy who wants to get better control of their home rather than in buildings, but that's happening, and it's going to happen in commercial buildings and in bigger residential properties. The reason it will happen is people like Google and Samsung and IBM They're doing it. If we don't respond, we're left behind, you know, and actually the rate that IT moves is a huge pace, you know, and the building industry is really sluggish. So as a controls industry, as a controls manufacturer, we are already pushing that technology, and we're already looking at how our model's going to work for having strategy and control existing in the cloud. You know, ownership of that's going to be really difficult, and something we're all going to have to understand. If Global Associates install some wireless and IoT sensors in a big commercial building, and they all come up to a North server running our strategy that you've engineered, someone else then needs to maintain that site. How does that work? You know, so there's lots of questions that are going to come out of this, lots of realigning of how people sell their skills and their knowledge, and lots of retraining is going to be needed. There's some really good things that will come out of this. Engineers will spend less time sitting on the plant room floor with a laptop on their knees, I think, you know, which will be really nice, because I've done my fair share, and I'm sure we all have. That sucks, right? So less of that, good thing, you know, but maybe fewer engineers that can write strategy will be needed, and that might be a good thing, because there probably aren't enough of them out there at the moment. You know, in fact, I'm sure there aren't enough of them out there at the moment. So that can solve some of those problems for us. The technology will allow that a single seat, you know, in an office to write strategy for several buildings and have several projects managed from one place would be quite pleasant. And yeah, and the skill on site will be more about installing sensors, commissioning valves, and back to proper commissioning, you know, rather than having to worry about the control side of it so much. They'll have to learn about comms though. They'll have to make sure that Internet of Things enabled actuator on that damper there is talking to the strategy in the cloud, and they'll have to understand that. But I think that's probably 10 years away, maybe less, maybe 5 years away on some projects. I've heard of some projects that are happening now like this. They're not quite that advanced, because some of the controls at the edge of the building rather than in the cloud, but the idea of a controller on an air handling unit, for example, I think will disappear slowly. I think it's a threat to people that don't see how to use that. So I see that the popularity of smart buildings could be a really good thing for those of us that get our technology ready in time, you know, for that wave that's going to come of acceptance that smart buildings will suddenly become normal in the way that integration has become normal. And those that don't respond quickly enough and aren't already working on if you're not already working on Internet of Things based technologies, then you're standing on the Titanic and not seeing the massive iceberg ahead of you, frankly. And we've seen it, and actually we've already got technology for MQTT, pushing data up into the cloud. IBM Watson, we do a lot of work with IBM on their Internet of Things platform, and we're actually helping them test that platform themselves, so over in Ireland, which is so that whole Internet of Things and that whole smart home technology is all part of the same thing. They all rely on the same technologies, and I think we can ride the wave of popularity if we're clever about it, and if we rest on our laurels and just assume that we've got the marketplace, you know, to ourselves, and build these little islands that we've been really guilty of doing as a whole industry. You know, we sort of castle building where it's seen as a dark art, and lots of M&E contractors think we're the worst people in the world because we're so protectionist, you know, and that's got to change. It's really, really got to change, and it's up to us to change that. It's not up to, you know, we've got to we can't educate everyone. There isn't the time. Everyone is understaffed. Everyone's working at a million miles an hour. You can't get those sort of messages across, but they're going to be pulled through. That message will get pulled through by the sheer popularity of that technology.
The demand.
The demand, yeah, the demand.
Will make the market.
The market will make this happen, yeah. I think we have a few advantages. One is that we've been doing it for so long. You know, I started here, nearly 25 years ago, and as I mentioned earlier, it was bleeding edge then. But one of the things that we decided was really important at the time was that all of our interfaces would be written with manufacturer's permission. So there's no reverse engineered drivers in our massive library of 500 and something odd drivers. They are all supported by us here with our support team. And I think that gives us quite a big edge, actually. I think there's a fear with some of the more, there's the Android v Apple sort of debate, isn't there? Right? When you get an app on, I'm an Android user, right? So this might seem like a strange argument for me to make, but an app from the Apple Store has been accredited by them, has been tested by them, and you sort of get that feeling with those apps that it's going to work, and you're not downloading anything too flaky. The Android world is a slightly more risky world, you know, and some of us are happy to take that risk for the openness of it, and some of us actually want that real confidence that this thing is, that the Apple's world gives you, and you're happy to pay a slight premium for that, and that's fine, and people will take their choices. When it comes to our technology, we're open in the way that anyone can download our engineering software, anyone can learn how to engineer our products. Our documentation is unbelievable. You could just read our documents and learn how to engineer our products from the bottom up. You learn how a PID loop works from our documentation, not just how to set one up in our system, actually what PID loops are from the beginning to end. So they're almost like a full BMS training course in their own right. So we've got that openness side in terms of we want people to access the technology, but in the background what we've got is a slightly protectionist thing of we want to protect the quality of our products and the quality of our drivers and the quality of everything that we do, so that we know that it works, and if it doesn't work it's because someone else has changed something somewhere else, not us. So I think that's where we have a slight advantage over a lot of the other platforms which are a lot more open. Some people will go for that other platform because they want to develop their own technology and use that as a platform to sell their own drivers, and that's fine. Not everyone wants to buy technology like that. People want to buy something they know is going to work day one, save themselves time on site. Because if you try and save yourself time, if you try and save yourself money on the kits, on the controllers what, 10% of a job? That's not a big part of the project. You're getting margin out of a small area of the job. If you can save money on installation, save money with engineering time on site, actually that's a bigger part of the job. You can save a lot more money, and that's margin for the reseller. So that's how we help our resellers, is at where the margin is, not where the a few quid here and there is. That is the most difficult thing, because you've got this, it is a double-edged sword. We have tech partners and gold partners, and those are on a list on our website, and those are people that have been through our formal training courses, have done many jobs with us to a high standard. And actually, I'll tell you how we judge it, how many support calls we get from them. Yeah, it's a really good judge of how good our systems integrator is. They go and just do the jobs and don't need to lean on us very much, because they really deeply understand it and they're doing good work over and over again. And that means that we get repeat business from them because they're delivering. The issue of getting blamed for failed projects is a really difficult one. I don't know how, as an industry, any of us overcome that, because Trend get it, and North get it, and Cylon get it, and Tridium get it, everyone gets it. And all of our controllers, a Siemens controller on an air handling unit, or on some pumps and valves, or a North controller on some pumps and valves, can both control those pumps and valves if set up correctly. There's no difference. They will do the same job, right? And we've all got different advantages in different things, but set up correctly, they're the same thing. They will turn those things on and off at the right time. It's how well they're configured. And getting those quality of engineers to site is actually been a real problem of our whole industry. And having the right guys on site has been really difficult, but there just aren't enough of them out there. And so, yeah, going back to my previous point about when it all happens in the cloud, I think that is going to really help with that. It's going to massively help with that. All you can do is train people, and work so hard to convince them to come on training courses, and which is difficult because they're understaffed. They've got 19 projects running with 13 engineers, and how the hell do you take time out to come and sit in an office in Brighton and, you know, learn. When do you get that time to learn? Really difficult. So yeah, it's not a problem that's going to go away, and there's no magic bullet for it, I don't think. We just have to keep working really hard, convincing people that training is so important. The biggest challenge we face in the market, copy and paste specifications. Yeah, I said it. I went there. It is. I saw a special. Now I've done it now, so let's go with it, right? The elephant in the room of the whole industry. I saw a specification recently for a high-end house, £20 million house in Wentworth, that asked for a VDU and dot matrix printer attached to the BMS head end. 1980s technology. There's no head end on the job. The rest of the spec says nothing about a head end, right? There's no need for a head end on the job. It was some underfloor heating manifolds, an interface to some Mitsubishi air conditioning units, and a link to Crestron. Great, right up our street, perfect for us. But a dot matrix printer, so that whole section of that specification is just copied and pasted. And actually, if you looked at the way that the control spec had been written, it didn't relate to that job at all, really. So I think one of the big issues we've got is it actually comes to cost. It's not copy and paste specifications. That is a symptom of the real problem, which is cost, and everything is being driven by cost. And actually, we're looking at the cost of controlling a building in the wrong way. We're looking at the cost of putting the controls into the building rather than the cost of controlling a building. You know? The cost of putting the controls into the building is small compared to the cost of controlling a building over its lifetime. And yet, we're saving money in the wrong areas and killing ourselves over it. If the M&E contractor or the client or the developer, whoever isn't willing to give the consultant design responsibility, not just at the beginning of the project, but actually to oversee the handover and to have responsibility for that building actually working, then what's the consultant going to do? He's not interested in how it's finished. He's got a small amount of money to give them a specification that someone else has to deliver. And once it's gone out of the door, their involvement in the project is over. Where's their motivation to do a really fine job on this? Actually, there isn't any great motivation. There's no money in it for them. You know, and people need to be rewarded for their work, and people need to understand that you get what you pay for. And unfortunately, that is the root of it. So I said copy and paste specifications. Actually, no, cost. Cost is the problem. That's the root of it. That's why these things happen. So yeah, I think design responsibility for one person, you know, or one body, and whether that's the M&E contractor or the consultant, someone has to have, you know, a beginning, middle and an end, and they have to be responsible for selection of the kit, making sure it all works, and at the end has to be the person that gets kicked if it doesn't. And if you give someone that responsibility, then you have to pay them well for that, to take their risk and to do a good enough job that everything will work, and I think that's not happening. There's a big industry out there for going back to buildings and making them work properly. You know, we call it optimising buildings. What you're doing is you're fixing the stuff that wasn't put in right in the first place. And it wasn't put in right in the first place, not because the engineers on site weren't good enough, not because no one wanted to do a good job, but actually the money wasn't there and the time wasn't there to do it properly. And because the money wasn't there, because it's driven by this upfront cost rather than the lifelong cost of running the building. Yeah. It's very frustrating. Yeah, we do lunchtime seminar. I do them all the time, basically, as much as I can, and it's really a really powerful thing to do. Really important that the whole industry does it, actually, not just manufacturers, not just resellers. You know, everyone needs to get involved, and that needs to happen with not just with consultants, but M&E contractors as well. So you need to go and hit them and educate them. It's it's a key part of my job, actually. Is lunchtime seminars. It's what I do. So it's one of the things we find a lot when it comes to educating consultants is that you see specifications written that are clearly based around a particular product. And you read the spec and the list of features, you think, I know the consultant's seen this particular box and wants that on the job. And they haven't named it, but we can all see what that is. Fine, I probably won't bother quoting that one. I think they've made their choice. And then you see other specs and you think, well, I don't know of a product in the world that does that. And it makes you wonder how, how that ever happened on paper. It's almost a fantasy wish list. I think there's several ways that we can do that. One is to actually get in front of developers and end users and make sure that they are told what to do, that we pull through this technology. I think the driver for any market is the end user, the person that is paying the bill. And that, to me and to you, looks like an M&E contractor is paying our, because he pays our bills, but actually that's not the end customer. And the end customer will buy into technology, will be keen to have the best of breed and the latest things. And when was the last time you got on an aeroplane and pulled out the High Life magazine, for example, and saw an advert for a smart building of some description, or a BMS controller that could do something special? Well, it sounds odd having that advert in there, but when you really think about it, the people on those planes, the building owners, the bloke in first class who runs whatever it is, who has this massive network of buildings, if you could show him there that he could save X money on his real estate, wouldn't that just pull through your technology beautifully into these buildings? There's the man that you really, or woman that you really want to hit with this information. So I think pulling through that, because as I mentioned earlier, everyone's understaffed. The M&E contractors, the engineers on site, the systems houses, everyone looks dead on their feet after time. Everyone's doing too many projects, working too hard. And the time to just stop and learn and just take a breather and look at it, can we do this any better? Is there a better way? You kind of running so fast that you're almost tripping over yourself and you don't have time to stop and tie your shoelaces, and just, right, let's reset. So as a manufacturer, as a systems house, how do we get that? How do we make that happen? You have to force it, and the way to force it is to go beyond there and get to the end users. So we are looking at plans of how we can do that and how we can influence the top level to pull technology through. And if we don't do that as an industry, and I'm saying we as North, but that also includes all of my competitors and all of our customers. If we don't do that, then Google and Samsung and IBM, they are doing that, And it seems like it's a massive budget and it's scary. We've got to do it, because the way that the industry is going, we've got a choice. The experience of a building is how it works around you, isn't it? And does it work as you expect it to? Yeah. That's actually the biggest thing. And if no one asks the occupier how they expect this thing to work, then they're never going to be really satisfied. It's that massive frustration. Whatever technology I buy, if it doesn't work as I'm half expecting it to work, I find it immensely frustrating. You download an app and it doesn't quite, hang on. So you've got to really rethink how this person's. Now, you can overcome that in buildings. We have the opportunity, because the people that actually pay the bill are the people that are going to occupy it. And so let's understand, I think one of the things that one of the good things that's really coming out of that sector, that layer of the chain, is BIM and modelling, and people feeding back into that with user satisfaction surveys. I spoke to a consultant the other day at a show who has developed an app in the cloud that you can install into a building, and at every desk you can sit and pull up this page, and it will ask you lots of questions about how your experience of the building is going, and that feeds back into generating reports, which the FM team or whoever's maintaining the site can then use to go upstairs for money to improve the building. Brilliant. That sort of thing and so that's where technology will help with that in a big way. But that's, again, it's after the fact. And again, it's after the fact, because we're not involved earlier enough. We're just not involved early enough, and that's what kills it every time. The man or the woman that decides is not involved that decides to build the building isn't involved in how the building works, because the people that decide how the building works are involved too late, after everything else is done, and we're just tail end Charlies, you know. Early stage collaboration is the solution to this problem, you know. And it's been staring us in the face for 20 years. It's been the same for for so long. It's frustrating. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Whatever system you choose, and I would argue that you should choose a North system, always. But that's not going to happen, right? I have competitors and they're going to find markets. Whichever system you choose, you can get a really good solution from. Okay, and I might argue that the integration side of a job is easier with my kit, and it's more difficult with someone else's. But they can do it sometimes by buying bits of our kit on the side of theirs. So whatever a customer wants for their building can be achieved with pretty much all of the products that are available in the marketplace, if they're engaged early enough, you know. And it might cost them more with someone else's, or it might be more difficult with someone else's, or whatever, but they can get it. But only if they're engaged early enough, that everyone around the table knows what the end point is early enough in the project, so that all the costs are recognised, everyone understands how this job has got to be delivered. And coming in right at the end and oh, by the way, we need to interface to the lighting system that's got to control all the fan coils in all the meeting rooms. Well, okay, that's really, really cheap and easy if you tell me day one, and now it's really expensive now that I've designed and installed all the panels. I think it's a really powerful tool. I think there's two sides to it, really. There's the whole sort of, well, if you're not proud of it on LinkedIn, did it really happen? Sort of, you know, when you're looking, oh, okay, yes, well done. But then but on the other side of that, when we put a new feature in Commander, and I put a post on LinkedIn about that, 2,000 people have seen it in a day. I can't do that any other way, you know, and I can't get that through Facebook, and I could get some of that through Twitter. So LinkedIn has been actually a bit of a game changer for our industry. It's actually how we came to be sitting here today, isn't it, really? And seeing your videos and that conversation that sparked. So it's a very powerful tool for getting information out to quite a targeted audience really quickly. I think you have to be careful how you play it. I think you can overdo it on there in a big way. And you know, you keep seeing the same things going over and over and over, and that can get a bit tiring. And I think people there's a growing trend of making negative comments on competitors' products, which I can't really understand. You know, if people want to do that, that's up to them. But I'll stick to making positive comments or none. I think that's probably the best way. The most important driving factors in our industry right now is going to be training, actually. If it's not cost, it's training. So we touched on cost earlier, and I think that is a problem that needs overcoming, because we're focusing on the cost at the wrong area. The education and training is going to be one of the big driving factors in our industry, because the rate of change that's about to be forced upon us, and I mean forced upon us. It's coming, whether we engage with it or not, and therefore that is going to have a massive impact on how where we employ engineers from, the skill set they're going to need, and how we train engineers. So they're not just going to have to understand about what a pressurization unit does. They're going to have to understand about how MQTT works, and IP addressing, and and what the cloud actually is, you know, and all of those sort of things are going to have much more of an effect. So the industry has changed in a big way, and the engineers have had to learn more communication skills as integration has become ubiquitous. And once the Internet of Things starts becoming more and more commonplace, then those skills are going to be really in short supply in the industry, and we have to look as an industry of how we get those skills. We need to provide them ourselves. We need to train people, and that's what we really need to do. So I think that's going to be a big driving factor in the industry. I think that, and looking back at this costing and influencing this earlier, getting in early enough to influence and convince the right people that actually a bit of upfront cost has massive long-term savings, and that is is something we need to do. That's not a driving force in our industry, but that's something we need to drive. So I suppose I've described some threats really, rather than driving forces. Driving force will be threats from outside technology. Yeah, and that's actually what we've got to respond to. So that's certainly what's driving us at the moment. Big style. Yeah, our next 2-3 years, no, probably our next 5 years worth of development work will all be cloud-based and internet-based. Latest version of Commander is 5-6 years old, the latest hardware version, and would I see us ever doing another hardware controller? Possibly. There will be other hardware products that we will sell, but longer term, the focus will be on providing cloud-based control and viewing of buildings, and that will be true for most manufacturers, I think. No, that will be true for the manufacturers that are still around 10 years' time. If you're developing your new controller right now, I think you're probably looking at the wrong end of the market. You need to be making what you've got Internet of Things ready, which is what we're doing. So all the development work that's going into Commander is to make it IoT ready, and that's something we've pretty much done. There's a few other bits to do, but that's pretty much there. The next lot of development is cloud-based, and yeah, that will be where it is. It will become more reliable, so buildings will become more intelligent and the control will become more reliable. You'll get that reliability by not having controllers on site. So by having sensors and actuators and presence detectors and lighting ballasts and whatever it is, however granular we get with it, those things reporting to the cloud and receiving information from the cloud means that with 2 channels to the cloud, with a copper line or a fiber line and a 4G line to the cloud, you've got redundant communications to your controller. You can then have redundant controllers in the cloud. So currently, I've used the air handling unit example a lot, so I'll stick with that. If you look at an air handling unit now and you put a controller on an air handling unit, what we've done is we've isolated that as a point of failure. So by distributing the controls around a building, we haven't stopped risk. We've isolated risk. So there's still a risk that if that controller fails, that air handling unit will fail. Other air handling units will still keep going. So that's how we manage it currently. Right now, there's no way of having a second controller on that unit. You can't make that redundant. With the cloud, you can, and that's where some of the real benefits come. So the fear of oh my God, I'm relying on the internet, for this is going to be overcome by the realization that, well, when was the last time you actually didn't have an internet connection? If you look on Facebook, you will see someone say, my internet connection's down. Well, they just posted on Facebook telling you that their internet connection's down. What they mean is their primary route to the internet is down and they're using their mobile to get to the internet. So they're not cut off. And when you really ever cut off, and you go to the Highlands in Scotland and you'd be cut off, fine. But a building, sorry. The reliability of connection to the internet is there now, And if you have to put 2 suppliers' cables in to your building and a 4G on the roof, fine. That you'll get that back in reliability like you wouldn't believe, and you'll get that back in the way that you can manage that building and the way that building can suddenly become far more intelligent. You centralize all of the integration at that point as well. So information from the lighting system, from people counting systems, from door access, from everything is available in one place. And we have to overcome the protocol issues still. You'll still need some translation in the cloud, because even if you look at MQTT or you look at JSON as a way of transmitting data to the cloud doesn't define the tag for the temperature for a meeting room. That still needs some translation. But once we overcome that, we can overcome that in one place with one bit of software. We can write the strategy in one place with one bit of software. This is the advantage I sell with our products now, but in a distributed way So you put a commander in and you write one bit of strategy that talks to everything in the building because all the drivers are built into the commander. But then you've got to buy lots of commanders and you've got to buy lots of IO and and you create these little islands of control which you try and join together cleverly in strategy. Actually, if you put one blob of control, that engineer's got one thing to write, one way of managing that system, and then he copies and pastes it onto a redundant server, and you put 2 links in, and the whole building, every device in that building has 2 controllers. One just sat there waiting for the other one to fail. It's incredibly reliable. It's incredibly fast. 100 meg pipe up and down, to the cloud is no different to a 100 meg Ethernet connection to another controller on your network. It's no different at all. It's fast, and you've got you've not got a 1 second step time in your controller or anything. Everything's happening at a rate. We're using blade servers and in massive data centers. It's going to be, you can have massive power there. And the more people talk about artificial intelligence, and the more, it's not a phrase I really like, artificial intelligence, because it's so misused and it has so many meanings. But I think we can all understand where I'm coming from is that buildings will be able to learn. No, controllers will be able to learn. The cloud will be able to learn how buildings are used. And so the old idea of calendars and timers in buildings and things like that, we assume a maximum occupancy for a building. We assume the flow rates that are required. We assume when people are going to turn up for work and when they're going to go home from work. But actually, the workforce is more fluid than that these days. Buildings are more fluid, but people have patterns. So you'll have a pattern about when you come to work and when you go home to work. I have a pattern about and those are different. And if we worked in different offices, then we could service those individual offices differently. And it might be that you tend to come in really early on a Friday and go home a bit early. It might be that I tend to come in really late on a Monday and go home a bit later on a Monday. If that's our pattern, and that's how workforces work these days, we're not all 9 to 5. We are allowed that freedom. Then buildings have to be controlled that way, but it has to be learned. It's not something that an engineer sat on the plant room floor with his laptop can program in for what might be your office in the future. It has to be learned, and you can only learn that with this centralization. So that is the future, I think, for controls. It's a problem that we have been lucky in that we haven't had to deal with as a company so far, because the technology in Commander is so proprietary. That it's really hard to hack. We sit on banks' networks, and we've been through penetration testing with the banks, and they just keep asking us, well, what is it? What am I testing? And we think, well, that's the right answer, because if you can't work out what even this thing is, then we're pretty secure. When we move to the cloud, this is something it's going to be the first phase of our development work, is security. And because security has to be from the bottom up. It can't be something that is bolted around. Well, it will be wrapped around, but it also has to be quite fundamentally in the system. And from me personally, I've got a lot of learning to do about internet security, and the whole industry is in the same boat. Really, developers are ahead. And hopefully our developers are way ahead. They've been talking about it and learning about it and discovering what was really important in internet security. What some of the savings that are going to come out of cloud-based control will have to be ploughed back into security. There's a cost to it. Friend Ed, a personal friend of mine, was the head of security at the Inland Revenue. And he's the bane of his life is companies who assume that their IT department are security savvy, and their IT department know a bit about security and do bits here and there. But some of their policies prevent things from being updated, they prevent things from being patched, and actually security isn't coming first. The underlying business processes are coming first. That actually puts them all at risk. It puts the whole business at risk. If you put security first, some of the processes will have to change, and there's a cost to that. There's a cost to security. We have to get used to that cost. We have to accept that cost, and we have to accept the advice of the experts. Let's listen to them.